I'll just share a little bit of the why. I'm really excited to be up here with Jeremiah and happy to go into and have discussion around the hows. But to kick us off with just the why here. Really, as I talked about last year, right? There continues to be a lack of progress from agricultural non-point source pollutions across the Western Lake Erie Basin. I think a lot of us that work on these issues every day understand the complexity of it and how challenging the nuances of these issues can be. As we look to leverage investment that we have in the department about driving forward in meaningful ways, progress, a few pieces to this really became essential for me and for the department of how are we definitively correlating the investments we're making with success. How do we envision success? Like, how do we define this in a way that is well correlated with nutrient reductions in the basin? Certainly these pay-for-performance models are not brand new. These have been one of the tools in the toolbox that agriculture's utilized over the years. But to me, this concept really is focused in the fact that we're going to be specifically looking at aligning those incentive payments to farmers, the technical resource capacities that are often really critical for the implementation of practices, doing so in a way that's taking best available science, putting it in place in real time. It's work that's possible for us based on the expansions to water quality monitoring that we're building out across the basin. It utilizes recent advancement in modeling, an understanding of how losses are occurring in real time with variable weather that goes on, with more advanced understanding of some of the nuances around topography and soil type. It's work at the end of the day that is aligning what we care about, nutrient reductions, with the financial investments that we have as resources for us. So I think it's a step forward of making sure that the things we're going to do, that the actions we're going to take, are going to be lined up with the expectations that we have to the people of all Michigan to be making progress on these kind of nutrient reductions. So there's a lot of pieces to this that we've worked to incorporate, listening to farmers, listening to the technical service providers about barriers that we often have to conservation adoption. As Michelle noted, this is a 7-year project. This is a longer project than we often undertake within the scope of these, knowing that those longer time frames are often critical to seeing the results of this. These are dynamic functional biological systems, right? We're working on implementing changes into soil chemistry, soil biology. This is not stuff that happens overnight. We know that it requires trust of farmers. We know that it requires the leveraging of really skilled technical advisors working with farmers to make sure that we're managing for all these various outcomes that we care about. It's the environmental aspects, but it's ensuring that farmers are short-term profitable so that we can continue to have farmers that are willing to prioritize biological management of soils, that they can continue the financial viability of their operations as well. So we're really committed to keeping these approaches flexible and dynamic, incorporating better available science as we continue to develop it. It's a priority for us as a department to really push science and not only kind of take what's available out there from the academic community, but be specifically working with the academic community to make sure that we're coming up with better and better science so that we can get better and better results. So, Michelle, I don't know if you're going to introduce Jeremiah, but really thankful for Jeremiah and his partnership, the entire MSU IWR team, to doing something a little bit different with us and working together to make sure that we're moving this ahead in a concerted fashion.
All right, well, thanks for joining this morning to learn a little bit about this performance-based conservation adoption program, or pay for performance. And thanks, Dr. Boring, for introducing and explaining some of the why that we're doing this. So this is really a near and dear project for me. I grew up in Monroe, about 5 miles from the River Raisin. So as a kid, fished the river quite a bit, so water quality was really important. I still go back there. couple times a year to do some fishing. I actually really wanted to show you guys a picture of me fishing at the river, but I couldn't find one, so I asked ChatGPT to put one together for me. So here I am fishing at River Raisin, and I normally carry an extra hand with me because I catch really big fish. And also, I really like to wade in my jeans because that's a great feeling. And that's me when I was a little bit younger doing it as well. So, wear the same clothes often. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the pay for performance. A few things I want to go over today is just talk about what is pay for performance, what are some of the benefits, and why are we using this approach. I'll give kind of an overview of the project and what we plan to do with this. I'll mention a little bit of the watershed modeling that we're doing that's going to help us predict the outcomes from these conservation practices. I'll mention a little bit about our nutrient tracking dashboard that the state's going to be using to keep track of the benefits of these investments that they're making in the watershed, and then go over a little bit of the timeline, and if I have some time at the end, I'll show a few example slides of the interface that we'll be working with. So what is pay for performance? If we just go by definition, it's a conservation funding approach that links the landowners and achievements for their payments to environmental outcomes, as opposed to just paying for a specific conservation practice. But it might be easier to look at these in a comparison standpoint. So if we look at some of the traditional pay for practice approaches that are currently out there that might come out of Farm Bill or other related programs, we have a specific payment for a conservation practice, and that payment is typically associated with some sort of fixed cost. Now I have to look, I don't have my slide changing here, so I might have to glance back and forth. It's associated with some sort of fixed cost for either fuel or management of that practice or other installation costs, and it doesn't necessarily tie to a specific performance outcome. So, I say this with a little bit tongue in cheek, but after you install this, you kind of spin the wheel to see what your performance might be. You might get a little bit of phosphorus removal. In our case, that's what we're interested in. You might get a lot of phosphorus removal, or you might actually contribute more phosphorus from a given practice at a certain location. In contrast, for paying for performance, the payment is actually based off of the performance of that practice. So in our case, we're interested in phosphorus reductions, so we're going to be paying on a per pound of phosphorus reduction basis. So that same practice, we end up looking at the soil types, the residue on the field, the precipitation in the area, what was the nutrient inputs, slopes, all different sort of characteristics about that field, and then that gets run through a model to give us a prediction of what that reduction of nutrients will be. And then based off of that reduction, there are higher payments associated with greater amounts of phosphorus reduction. So here, and this will kind of go into this a little bit more detail. In an earlier project, we modeled 470 fields across the River Raisin of all different shapes and sizes. We took those fields and we assigned random conservation practices that are typically used in the Western Lake Erie Basin. So each one of those fields, we assigned one of these practices to it. And then we took the EQIP payment rates that were associated with those practices, and then we modeled to see what the phosphorus reduction was for each of those. What we found here, and these are plotted on this graph, is each one of those dots represents one of those fields that you saw earlier. As you go up the graph, that's the payment, the cost of the payment for that particular practice at that location. If you move to the right over here, that's an increased amount of phosphorus removal. And if you move left of the zero over here, that practice contributed phosphorus. So what you'll see is over here on this left-hand side, we have maybe 30–40% of the practices that got paid for, even though they might be great practices and they might be doing other things like sediment removal. As far as phosphorus, a good portion of them actually contributed phosphorus to the system. So this is an important part of why pay for performance is such an important aspect of trying to be efficient with the cost or the dollars you have for increasing or reducing nutrients in the watershed. Everything over on this side, these had positive effects as far as nutrient reduction. And then we can look at individual outliers that were very efficient. So this one cost $585 and removed 300 pounds of phosphorus at very low cost, $1.95 per pound. And then on the other extreme, we had one that cost $19,000 and actually added 15 pounds of phosphorus. So again, this is why using a modeled approach beforehand is so important. So that leads me to kind of 5 benefits of using this pay-for-performance approach that we're using. One is it better aligns with your environmental goals. So you can really attach what you're trying to achieve with these practices and connect that to a more effective cost for doing that, which leads me to number 2, is these are more cost-effective at achieving a specific environmental outcome. They're quantifiable and very transparent. So we know ahead of time what the practice that we're paying for, how much phosphorus reduction is anticipated. Everything goes into a database. We know the exact payment for that, and we know we get a picture of verification of all the fields, so that whole process is very transparent. 4 is it attracts potentially investors from private sector. So we work with the Nature Conservancy on a number of these projects where they've used our platform for pay for performance. Coca-Cola and Method Company were using it to offset their groundwater withdrawals, and so they were paying producers on a per gallon basis of groundwater recharge using this same approach. So there's an opportunity to bring additional investments to conservation through this approach. And then lastly, it has the potential to offer higher payments to producers and give incentives to get those into the places that they'll have the greatest outcome. Now, I do want to mention on the pay for practice, not that there's anything wrong with the pay for practice. I mean, if anybody's gone out to a field that's got sediment erosion and you put in a grass waterway, that practice is doing something. But if you want to achieve a certain environmental outcome, paying for performance is going to be the best way to be most cost effective with those dollars. So when we started thinking about what did we want to do with this program, when we were trying to envision this from the start, we really wanted to develop a program that was going to have the biggest effect of trying to reduce nutrients and achieve those reduction goals for the Western Lake Erie Basin. We tried to do it in a way that was very cost effective so that we could drive and use the dollars to be driven by the nutrient reductions and the performance of those practices. We also wanted to look at how could we develop an enhanced network of these sellers or promoters of the system. So traditionally we worked with just maybe one organization in conservation districts. They've done a great job of doing that, but we wanted to cast a broader net and see what other sort of groups or organizations we could bring in that interact with producers to have more contact and selling points and promoting points with the project. And I'll go into some of those organizations here in a little bit. And we also want to try to increase some of the sustainable management through outreach, education, and training. So we have some of that built in. And then instead of just looking at what that practice will do related to phosphorus, we know that these same practices, like I mentioned earlier with Coca-Cola and Method Company, they can accomplish other things. So a lot of these practices will increase groundwater recharge. They might reduce sediment. There might be opportunities for habitat for pollinators. And so we really want to try to look at an entire ecosystem package for each of these practices. So we'll try to quantify those as well. So we really are building kind of off of some experience. As Michelle mentioned earlier, she had done some work with us previously. In 2016, we had a pay-for-performance based project that was in the River Raisin watershed only. And at the end of that project, we found that it was 7 times more cost-effective at reducing a pound of phosphorus than just doing a first-come, first-served for those same practices. There's a great how-to manual that Winrock put out for pay for performance. It's like a how-to guide. And one of the things that they mentioned in there was really needing, for these projects to be successful, they really need to have a time for the farmers and the sellers and promoters of this program to understand and learn about the program. So typically we might do these as like a 3 or 4 year program, but as Michelle mentioned, this is going to be a 7-year effort. So we really want to allow the time for that to happen to increase the likelihood of success across the project. Lastly, the Nature Conservancy, we've done some work with them again on these pay for performance. In Saginaw Basin, one of the things that they noticed was really trying to, the importance of really trying to provide incentives for the sellers and promoters of the system. So that was one of the things we started taking into consideration for this new program, is how could we build in an incentive payment program for this. So if we look at this by the numbers, we have $7 million going into conservation payments over the course of the project. We have an additional $1 million that's getting set up for incentive payments. So these incentive payments are going to go to organizations that are enrolling producers into the program. We'll be working on trying to figure out what the cost of those over the first year, doing some planning. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But we really want to build all the components that we need to have a successful delivery of this. So we talked a little bit about the timeline. The project just got started here in June. As we move into July, we're going to take this first year to really strategize. We have an advisory group that we're bringing in, made up of different researchers and stakeholders, participants, state government. They're all kind of going to provide different strategies and help us think through the best way to be successful during that first year. So we'll be fine-tuning different things. We'll talk a little bit about that in the discussion portion here today. In that first year, we'll also be going over some of our model incorporation. We'll be doing some interface and testing for the design of the platform that we'll have. And then in spring of next year, we'll open it up for enrollment, and that'll go from 2026 to September of 2032. So I laid out a process diagram to just kind of go through the steps of what we're doing here. So the first one is developing the models. We're using SWAT model, which is a watershed scale hydrologic model that we use for doing the predictions of how each practice will perform, because every practice is not going to perform the same in every place. So different practices perform different based off of characteristics of the field, the slopes, and soil types. And so we've already done that. We've already done that process. MDARD has covered that with some other work that we're doing. So the SWAT model is completely finished at this point. SWAT stands for the Soil and Water Assessment Tool. It has a number of inputs that go into it: precipitation and temperature, wind speed, land use, and soil. These are kind of inputs into that. The model then provides outputs on runoff and water quality and soil erosion at daily, monthly, and yearly time steps. So this is what our completed SWAT model looks like. Essentially, we built off of, originally U of M had put together a SWAT model for the river raisin. We took that model and we updated the weather on that, and then we also moved it into SWAT Plus, which has some additional features. And then we modeled the additional sub-watersheds around that, and then combined that into one overall model. And this is what's going to be kind of the engine that's running behind these predictions. That was calibrated to the USGS gauging stations. We had evapotranspiration rates that came from MODIS, and then the National Ag Statistics for crop yields. And then we ran over 9,000 plus combinations of scenarios for these conservation practices across the entire watershed. So if we go to the next one here, in the process is we're going to be selecting the conservation practices. We have a number of those that have already been identified. I'll share what we've kind of had some initial conversations about. We'll then go into developing the payment rates, both for on phosphorus and on a per pound basis, and then also what those incentive rates might be for these other organizations that are enrolling producers. We'll have an advisory team that will provide input over the first year on kind of identifying and landing on where these are going to be and which practices we might want to prioritize. We'll then move down into development and quantification. That's going to be the contracting tool and the interface that people will interact with to do the estimates. We already have that platform developed. This will just be a process that will customize that a little bit. Next will be enrolling producers. And for enrolling producers, these are some of the organizations that we're thinking about. It's not a comprehensive list, but these are the types of groups that we want to bring into that larger net that we're casting for people that will interact with farmers to bring into the system. Once those practices get verified, we have a process that we're working out that the producer will have a verification. They might be able to send photos via their phone or some other documentation. Once that's set up, then we'll go into the payment that'll go out to producers, and the Illinois Conservation District is going to be leading that effort, so they'll handle all the payments that go out to the producers. And then lastly, these will all get tracked in the nutrient tracking dashboard. So everything that is getting implemented in this practice will have all the nutrient reductions recorded in that dashboard. This is one more diagram that just focuses a little bit more on the actual interactions with the producer as opposed to the steps process. So initially here, we have organizations, Alliance for the Great Lakes, Michigan Agribusiness, MSU Center for Regen Ag, MSU Extension are kind of supporting this sales and promotion group here. So these again are some of those organizations mentioned in that previous slide. The first interactions with producers will be through these groups. As those groups interact, they'll use the Great Lakes Watershed Management System that has the SWAT model running in the background. That'll give them the estimate of how that practice will perform on one of their fields. They can do the contracting and everything right in place there. That'll go through. Once they finish that up, they can send validation of the verification of the practice in its installation. Those will all go over to somebody who does, on our side, doing kind of tech support and verification, just to make sure that everything looks good. It'll come back over to IWR, and then we will send out payments for the incentives to those organizations that enroll the producer. And then lastly, conservation payment will go from the conservation district back to the farmer. And then all this again will get reported back into the nutrient tracking dashboard. So we're really excited about some other aspects of this project. There's some yield stability mapping that's going to happen from the Center for Regen Ag. Dr. Bruno Basso will be working on that. This yield stability map looks at farm fields and tries to identify areas that are not producing as much as other parts of the field. So these lower production parts of the field often are not very, you take a lot of input costs like seed or fertilizer and seed and fuel for managing those, but you're not getting a lot of return. So there's opportunities there where maybe you can retire those portions of the field and actually be more profitable than if you were to continue to work those parts of the field every year. So these maps will have an opportunity for our promoters and sellers of the project to have a conversation with producers to see if there's a way to increase more conservation through the fields. And then Center for Regen Ag with Jason Roundtree will also be helping us with supply chain engagement. This will be helping to equip some of the stakeholders to effectively utilize the yield stability maps that I mentioned, and then also trying to think a little bit about how to help with transitioning producers from one management system to the other. If there are any risks that are associated with their financial risks, if there are different tools or mechanisms to help reduce that. So we're also trying to see how we might be able to get a more complete supply chain engagement in here to increase the success. So Center for Regen Ag will be leading that effort. And then these are some of the conservation practices that we've talked about so far. We've been looking at cover crops, filter strips, nutrient management, crop rotations, drainage water management, and other sort of structural practices is just some initial conversations of things we'd like. This isn't a comprehensive list, and as we go through, as I mentioned in that first year, we'll spend more time trying to identify which of these practices we want to include and which ones we might want to prioritize. The expanded ecosystem benefits package I mentioned, these are 6 different ecosystem benefits we want to include in here, which are groundwater recharge, pollinator habitats, carbon sequestration, soil health, sediment savings, and also runoff reduction. So we will try to model these. Some of these are already built into the SWAP model that we have, but a couple other ones we'll have to actually add in some additional models. But we want to have an entire package so we know that each one of these practices are doing more than just phosphorus reduction. And then, as I mentioned, we'll bring, starting in July, we'll have set up an advisory team that'll be a diverse group that'll have practitioners, researchers, and other decision makers involved there. They'll be helping us provide feedback to the team and strategizing over that first year, looking at conservation practices offered, what some of the payment rates will be, and what some of the incentive payments associated with those will be. And then lastly, this is what I shared at our meeting last year. So we're in the testing phase right now using some real data for the dashboard. We've been working on that. It will be fully available by the time that this project is starting to enroll producers and get fields in, so we'll have real-time data. And again, this nutrient tracking dashboard will really help the state keep track of their nutrient reduction goals and also be able to communicate that back to the public on what the progress is that they're having. And the last couple of slides I have here are just a few screenshots from our previous platform. We'll do some enhancement to this, but it'll give you an idea. When one of these groups are working with producers, they can either digitize a field like what's here in orange, or if there are field boundaries already created, you can upload those field boundaries into the system. It will ask a few questions about the management of that field, like what the nutrient applications were, what kind of residues in the field, and then it'll run in the background and provide an output on the change in phosphorus and other sort of characteristics of outputs that we're looking for, or environmental outcomes. And then it'll provide a payment that'll be associated, again, based off of the per pound of phosphorus that's being removed in that system. And then we'll have a contract that's set up, and then we can move forward. With that, I'll wrap it up and open it up for any questions.